Okay, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into a really pivotal figure.
Absolutely. We're looking at the early days of French Somaliland, what's now Djibouti.
Right, and specifically at Djama Ali Moussa Zaili. We've got these articles, some historical accounts here.
Yep, a good collection to work from.
And our mission, based only on this material you've provided, is to figure out his role, his influence. Basically, why he matters.
You might see different spellings, by the way. Djama Kali Musalichi or Djama Ali Musa Djama Sali, same person.
Good point. We want to piece together his story, understand his impact on the region's history, using just what we have here, and we want to explore this together with you, the listener.
Exactly. It's about reconstructing from these specific sources.
So let's start at the beginning. Who was this person, according to these documents?
Well, the basics are born around 1910, place called Awdal, which was in British Somaliland then.
Okay, British Somaliland.
Yeah.
And the sources note his passing.
Yes, November 19th, 1959, though one source does mention November 10th, so slight variation there.
And his nationality shifted too, right?
Yeah.
French Somalilander, then later French citizenship.
That's correct. But what's quite striking right from the start in these sources is his career before politics.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
He was a sailor and a merchant. Not the usual path into politics, maybe.
Definitely not. That's quite a transition from, navigating ships to navigating political landscapes.
It is. And the sources also give us a bit on his background, his family.
His clan affiliation.
Exactly. He was from the Mahad case, Bahabarseli section of the Muhammad Ase Gadabursi clan.
Which is part of the wider Deer clan structure.
Right. And the sources point out that the Gadabursi clan was, well, pretty prominent in trade and politics across that whole area, Djibouti, Somaliland, the region.
So that connection, the existing networks in trade and clan, that probably played a role later on.
You'd have to assume so, yeah. It gives context to his later influence.
Okay, let's move into that political career then. The sources seem to highlight some real firsts for him.
They really do. Pioneering stuff for someone from the territory at that time.
Like what specifically?
Well, first representative of French Somaliland elected to the French National Assembly. That was 1946.
Wow, okay. In Paris?
In Paris. And also the first Somali senator, and he served as head of state of French Somaliland.
Head of state, too. And that Senate role, he was a senator for the French Fourth Republic.
Yes, from late 46, December 22nd, running through to May 25th, 1952, representing French Somaliland.
That's significant. A direct voice, even if a distant one, in the French government itself.
A monumental step, really. And the sources also talk about his earlier engagement more broadly with the colonial powers, not just the French, but the British, too.
How so?
They suggest he was among the first Gadabursi leaders to actually, work with them as they were setting up their administrations.
So collaboration,
Yeah.
participating in negotiations.
Exactly. Involved in agreements, discussions between the traditional local leadership and these new colonial structures that were coming in.
Okay, now speaking of those early interactions, there's a really fascinating detail in the sources you shared about the naming of the territory itself.
Ah, yes. This is quite specific in the material. It suggests he played a direct role.
What did you propose?
He reportedly put forward the name Côte Française de Somalie, French coast of the Somalis, kind of emphasizing the Somali population's identity there.
Interesting. But there was another suggestion.
Yes. The sources mention a counterproposal from someone called Burhan Bey, described as an influential figure, but from the Afar clan.
And his idea.
His was Côte Française de Somalie et des Afar, so including both groups explicitly in the name.
Okay. Two different proposals reflecting different perspectives, maybe. What happened?
Well, according to the sources we have, they ended up agreeing on the name Djama Ali Musa Zaili proposed the French coast of the Somalis.
Just his version.
That's what the material states. And it adds a layer of interpretation, too.
Which is?
It suggests this outcome points to well, the source uses the term shrewd approach on his part, getting his preferred name adopted.
Shrewd approach. That gives a glimpse into maybe his political style, even back then.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
It's how the source frames that specific negotiation.
So if we pull these threads together, his background, sailor turned politician, these firsts in French politics, engaging with colonial powers, this naming story, what kind of overall impact emerges from these sources?
The sources consistently frame him as having quite considerable influence, not just within his own Gadabursi community, but in the broader regional politics, too.
And they link his work directly to setting up the state.
Yes, to the sort of foundational steps, establishing governance systems, the early state structures, and what became Djibouti.
And does that earlier life, the merchant and sailor part, connect at all?
It seems relevant. The sources do mention his deep involvement in the region's economy, specifically highlighting, maritime commerce, port communications. That was his world before politics.
Right. And beyond just dealing with the colonial administration, was he involved in local politics as it started to form?
Yes, the sources connect him to something called the Groupe de l'Union Républicaine, the GUR.
GUR. What was that?
Described as one of the earliest political organizations in Djibouti, active in the 40s, 50s, involved in administration, development.
And his connection.
The sources explicitly say Djama Ali Moussa was among the first leaders who collaborated with this organization. So yes, involved in those nascent local political movements too.
Okay. So summing up his historical significance based only on what we've looked at here.
The sources definitely position him as a significant figure, right there in the formation of Djibouti, the establishment of French, and to some extent British administration.
Alongside others, like that Burhan Bey figure mentioned earlier.
Right. He was one of those key early leaders coming from a traditional leadership background, engaging directly with the colonial powers on really crucial decisions, things like the name, the governance structures.
So his story, as told here, it kind of illustrates how traditional leaders navigated this completely new political world.
Exactly. How they could impact things, maybe using, as that one source suggested with the naming story, quite astute or shrewd methods to achieve their goals within this new system.
Okay, so let's quickly recap for everyone listening. From these sources, we've seen Djama Ali Moussa Zali's journey, from sailor and merchant to a political pioneer.
The first representative in the French Assembly, first Somali senator, head of state, major roles.
We saw his early work with colonial powers, his links to early local political groups like the GUR.
And that specific, quite telling detail about his role in naming the territory the French coast of the Somalis, and the source's interpretation of his shrewd approach there.
And looking at figures like him is important for you because it really shines a light on those complex moments of change.
Yeah, it shows how individual actions, proposals, negotiations, even over something like a name, were part of building the foundations of modern nations like Djibouti.
It helps uncover these, maybe sometimes overlooked, parts of history that shaped the present.
And it does leave you with an interesting thought, based purely on this material. How did leaders like him, operating between traditional authority and these new colonial systems, actually manage to influence things? That shrewd approach the source mentions, it makes you wonder what skills, what insights from his past, perhaps, allowed him to navigate that specific situation.
Right, and how might other subtle actions by figures like him have had wider consequences we don't even fully see?
Exactly. Just something to consider about how history unfolds, often through these specific interactions and individual strategies.
A fascinating glimpse. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.